name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Can you hear me? Testing.
1 second.
Testing. Can you hear me? How about in the back row? Can you hear me? Yes, no? Is this working? Excuse me if we play a minute. How's that? I put more to my mouth. How's that? A little better? No. Yes, no? No. Okay. Should I keep talking? Okay. Sisters in the back, how's this? Is this better?
Is the
Okay. Is that better? A little better? Sisters in the back. Okay. You're holding up the walls. Christ is risen.
He is risen.
I'm so happy to be with you today. I have never spoken to a group before with tears in my eyes. The tears started when I came up and when Father led me and my husband into the nave of the church, and I saw all of you, and all of a sudden I just wanted to cry with love. Why? I don't know. Maybe we'll figure that out together in the next few hours together. And then secondly, more tears came as I was reviewing one more time with you the promotional video for this conference. That was a very, I don't want to say daring, but courageous and loving gesture for us to think about what that says. And so, okay, I'll just keep talking. We're going to have fun till we get this right. Okay. What I'd like to do now is start with a little bit of a reflection exercise. Now, I'm not going to give you anything touchy-feely. You know those touchy-feely things where you have to share everything and everybody knows your personal business. I don't mean that kind of reflection exercise. If you want to, you may later on. But I would like to ask you a couple of questions, and if you would look in your packet and get the notepad out and a pen or a pencil, because I want to ask you two interrelated questions. And you're going to need to write them down because they're interrelated. You need to see the two answers in front of you in your own handwriting as we talk. Okay, so I'm going to start with two questions. No one's going to see your answers, so you can say anything you want. No wrong answers. Isn't that great to get a test and know that there's no wrong answers? And so the first question is this, and please don't share your answers with anyone yet. We will talk about them in a few minutes, but I want you just to quietly, as we sit here in the presence of God, to reflect on your first response. And so in just a few words, and when you think about the video, the promotional video we just saw, I'd like you to think, what may have happened to that woman? What do you think may have happened to her to have her for us to see her in that way? So just take a moment, question one, and write down what first comes to mind for you. No one has to know your answer, just write it for yourself. What do you think may have happened to this young woman? And so finish that thought just for yourself. You don't have to write too much, just so that you know what came to mind for you. And I'll ask the second question, which is a little bit tougher. Ready? If you can imagine yourself in that young woman's shoes, what messages about yourself do you think she may have had? So let me say that again. If you were in this young woman's shoes, what message do you think, or messages do you think she may have been believing about herself? Right? At least 3. I wrote 3 myself. Actually, many more. What messages do you think she may have been believing about herself? Okay. So let's just take a minute and share what are some of the things that came to mind. Can I walk?
Sure, stand you the camera.
Oh,
I'll
So I
follow you.
can't
It's
go too
okay.
close?
I'll follow you.
go forward.
Yeah,
What came to mind? Anybody? Discouraged. She was discouraged. What else? I'll share mine at the end. I just want to hear what you all have to say.
Low self-esteem.
Feeling hopeless.
Low self-esteem.
Low self-esteem. So put that in an I message. Like, if I have low self-esteem, I feel what?
Worthless.
I had that down. I feel worthless. What else?
Why me would I do wrong?
Oh, yes, I got the chills when you said that one. Why me? What did I do wrong? What else?
Not being liked by others.
Say that again.
Not being liked by others.
Why aren't I liked by others? Why? That painful why. What else?
Loneliness.
Yes. I feel lonely. So turn that I am lonely into a message about me. I'm lonely because?
I have no friends.
Because I deserve this. More.
I did something wrong.
I did something wrong. If I did something wrong, what's that say about me?
Not a good person.
I'm not good. I'm bad. I'm defective. What else? Shame. Oh, shame. Hold that. Don't let me leave without talking about shame with you. Thank you. More.
I can't talk to anyone.
I can't talk to anyone because
No one understands.
no one understands. Because I am. Turn that into I am. I am shamed. We're back to shame. I'm back to shame. A couple of more, then I'll share mine with you. You already got one.
God hates me.
God hates me. Remind me to come back to God hates me. Okay? Others. I'm a failure. Any more? Unforgivable. I'm unforgivable. I had very close to that. I am valueless. I am alone. I'm so alone, even God doesn't know. So these are negative messages that, quite frankly, it's very easy for all human beings to fall into. They come in and out of our heads. The spiritual tradition of the church has a lot to say about that. But to start paying attention when we fall into the trap of these lies. These are lies. All right? God doesn't make junk. Okay, let me start with a few more thoughts about that for you. So, as we think about all of the sharing that you all had regarding this woman, what did all of this have in common? Or what theme did you hear the most? Someone did say it, but let's see if... What was the underlying theme? Self-esteem, okay. What wrecks self-esteem? What? Shame, very good. That's where I'm getting at. Self-esteem, authentic self-esteem, being the persons God is calling us to be, or the persons He's turning us into, gets derailed by shame, or at least toxic shame. There's two types of shame, and usually when you hear me, or when I'm at the seminary and I talk about shame in my classes, when you hear me use the word shame, I'm 99% talking about the bad shame which is toxic, poisonous shame. And what does that poisonous shame try to do? It tries to control us from the inside out. It tries to make us feel annihilated. I know when I'm feeling shamed, because there's no such thing as just being a little bit shamed. It's like being a little bit pregnant. Sometimes people notice it, sometimes they don't notice it. Pregnancy, when everybody notices, oh, everything's affected. But sometimes you don't notice the pregnancy and it's just as real, just as alive. Well, shame can be pretty invisible to people around us, but it's wrecking us up on the inside. And so what shame tries to do is it tries to tell us that we are junk, that we are worthless, and that when we fall into situations where the toxic shame, where people are utilizing shame to get their way, it's a tool or a weapon for manipulation. And so shame, this kind of shame, and just as a little bit of information, is always one of the ugly legs many psychological and spiritual problems stand on, always. Because it's inauthentic. It's not real. It doesn't bear witness to who we are in the presence of God. And so that's toxic shame, bad shame, poisonous shame. Now, when we talk about good shame, has anyone heard of good shame? But you'll know in a minute, you've heard it using other words. Or healthy shame. Has anybody heard the expression healthy shame? Okay, well then. What do you imagine healthy shame might be? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Being humble.
Yes, modesty, being humble. And that's what I want to talk about right now, about healthy humility. Healthy shame is healthy humility. Humility. The word humility, when we say it in English, comes from Latin roots, which refers to being of the earth. In the spiritual tradition of the Orthodox Church, humility refers to our knowing who we really are. Has anybody told you that? I'll go further. When we are deeply grounded in this knowledge of who we are, we become humble persons who are right-sized in the presence of God. So if I get struck by lightning and you never see me again, I would be honored if you remember that I'm the person that said humility is our being right-sized in the presence of God. Now, why would I say that? Because most of us might have perhaps one dimension or one facet of humility about what that looks like. Let's see. Think about David, who became king of Israel, when he was just a shepherd boy, and by many events that came in his life, got his slingshot, and on behalf of all the people of his nation, was able to confront this huge Goliath this huge giant and destroy him. Think of the nerve it took for him to stand up to Goliath. On a paradoxical note, that was an act of humility. He was right-sized in the presence of God. At the right time, and at the right moment, in obedience to where God had led him in his life to that time, he had to stand up to the giant. That was humility. Humility made him authentic in the presence of God in that way. Now, there's other ways of being humble. Most of us think of humility as being small. That's a good thing. Why would it be good? Well, sometimes when we get into situations where people are kind of like puffed up and into their own selves, kind of like, those puffer fish? There are these little fish, and then they kind of like, in order to impress all the other fish, they fill themselves up with hot air. Is that perfect? Right? And they get really big. But we know they're not really big, but they're not really themselves. They really can't eat. They really can't negotiate their lives. They just sort of like teeter-totter. They're being really big. And so that's not being authentic. That's really not being where they need to be in the presence of God at that moment. But when the pufferfish releases itself and becomes its right sized in what it's created to be, it can swim the way it needs because it's got all its faculties together. It can hide in the nooks and crannies from all the other big fish that want to eat it. So it's a real paradox that sometimes on my planet, 99.9% of the time, when we are supple and flexible and small, we can go places the big guys can never dream. Why? Because they're stuck on being addicted to being big, as opposed to becoming the son or daughter God is calling them to be. This is, forgive me, the more authentic teaching of Orthodox humility. Any comments before I go on? Class. Come on. Does this feel real? Does this sound good? It's supposed to be good news. This is supposed to serve the gospel. Let's say a little bit more about humility. As I said, a humble person is right-sized, not too big, not too small, in the presence of God, in the presence of other human beings and creation. It is only when we trust God in this way, when we are pliable, as I said, that gives the Lord more room to grow in us. The more He grows in us, the more we become the person He calls us to be, enlivened and empowered by Him within us, and His love better shines forth through us to others. True humility is never to be confused with humiliation. Two different animals. Make a note. Humility does not equal humiliation. Now sometimes when we're being humble, we feel that we are risking, it feels like we're on the doorway of humiliation. But that's sometimes the risk we take for the sake of love. But authentic humility leads to more life, always. Humiliation, no. Instead, humiliation is a suffocating weight. Has anybody felt that maybe at one time? Just nodding. For me, when I would feel that way, I want the earth to open up and swallow me whole and then close up so that I never existed. So nobody ever, when I'm in the depths of that very deep shame and humiliation, I don't even want to exist in. That's how bad it is, and that grieves God's heart. God does not want His sons and daughters to feel that kind of self-annihilating desire. Instead of that kind of weight, that kind of yoke, that kind of a message that wants to be God, the Lord Jesus says this. He tells us to be yoked to Him instead of that other yoke. Why? He says, "Come to me, all of you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest in your souls. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light." So healthy humility in the Lord is at the foundation of discovering the truth of who we are, and also the truth of whose we are. In the spiritual tradition of our church, we exclaim with the psalmist, and this is from Psalm 139, where he's saying, praying to God, "Lord, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." About this, the highly respected Orthodox theologian, Metropolitan Kallistos Ware says, he wonders this. He says, "Who am I? What am I?" The answer is no means obvious. I know but a tiny part of myself. The boundaries of the human person are extremely broad. They stretch far and wide across space, and out of space into infinity. They stretch backward and forward in time, and out of time into eternity. He says, "Within myself there are hidden, unfathomed depths eluding my comprehension." And this is true for all of us. The Lord's life-giving yoke is light. It teaches us about healthy care for self and healthy love for self. In other words, healthy self-care. Not love of self. That's that fallen ego stuff. I'm great. I'm wonderful. I'm better than all of you. I'm made by a better God than everybody else. I have a super expensive God. You've all got a cheap super discount God. That's pride. What's the quick Orthodox way of talking about pride? Pride is our desire to become God without God. God wants to share Himself with us. He wants us to become God with Him as His sons and daughters. Pride says, "No, God, I want to be God without you." Kind of like, ooh, it's really delusional. And you'll find lots of writings through the history of the church that refer to pride as a delusion. I might even be able to share a couple of those with you now. So pride is delusional. But when we take appropriate self-care, love for self, that's rooted in humility, taking care of ourselves as daughters of God. And so, with this in mind, what if we ask, if we live our daily lives believing distortions and misconceptions about who we are, that it is possible, and I've done this, that it is possible to swim for hours, days, sometimes weeks in false definitions, in poisonous definitions of who I am in my subconscious. I'm just swimming there, drowning. But I take that for normal because that I believe that as true, but I was believing a lie. These false beliefs with our own selves take on a life of their own. They become powerful and they distract us from connecting more authentically with God, ourselves, and creation. So it becomes like a snowball. It wants to become a snowball. All we have to do is turn to God to melt it. But it wants to be a snowball, getting its steam and taking over with our lives. It becomes a false relationship with ourselves, but it feels very real. And this is the common misconception, but it's a lie. It might feel real because our stinking thinking now makes it part of our being, but it's a lie. Let me tell you what some of the fathers of the church say about this. So I'm not just making this up. From the 4th century, the beloved, you read his writings, he's just wonderful. You think he just wrote them recently. St. Gregory of Nyssa. He was a teacher, a theologian, a bishop, a pastor. He was also married. And he advises us not to become distracted with the lies. Instead, he says, look to him, meaning look to Christ. He tells us to focus on the love of the living God. Focus on Christ. He says this, for this is the safest way to protect the good things you enjoy. Realize how much your Creator has honored you above all creatures. He did not create the heavens in his image, nor the moon, nor the sun, the beauty of the stars, or anything else which surpasses understanding. You alone are a reflection of eternal beauty, a receptacle of happiness, an image of the true light. And if you look to him, you will become what he is, imitating him who shines within you, whose glory is reflected in your purity. Nothing in the entire creation can equal your grandeur. All the heavens can fit in the palm of the hand of God. And although he is so great that he can hold all of creation in his palm, you can wholly embrace him. He dwells in you. That's an amazing thing. This wonderful teaching is also a lesson in humility. And it teaches us at least 3 things. One, said it a couple of minutes ago, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And on those days when it's hard to believe that, my sisters, you know what I tell myself? Hey, I don't feel so fearfully and wonderfully made today. To remember that, sometimes I have to make up the slogan, God did not make junk. There's nothing in the Bible, nothing in church history. God never made junk. None of us, his daughters and sons, are junk. On those really bad days, that's how I keep myself on track. Oh, okay, I might feel like junk, but that's the lie again. God does not make junk. That's the first thing. Second, we are made to grow in relationship because of God being a God who created us in his image and likeness, a God of 3 persons, yet is one. Being in that image and likeness, we are called to relate with him, one another, and all of creation. And because of that we are called to grow in relationship, there is a third thing, and I think the focus of the conference today is helping us do that. And that is, be careful. Be careful what we gaze at. We become like that which we gaze. You know, how many times do we sometimes waste our time worrying about things that kind of like put us into a negative place, and then we kind of like live the rest of the day out of that place. This is human, this happens to all of us, but the Lord loves it when we challenge that. And how do we challenge that? We don't even have to challenge it directly. We just have to give it our backside, the coldest side of our being, and face it. Look to him. When we gaze toward that which we most desire, which is God, we become connected more deeply to that. Even going deeper, Another saint from the same century, Saint Cyril of Jerusalem, said, "Look within yourself. Look within yourself. From your own nature, you can learn something about your own Creator. There's nothing to be ashamed of in your body. If you are in control of your members, they are not in the slightest evil. Our limbs do not cause sin, but the wrong use of them. The Creator of our bodies knew what He was doing. Look at or look to your Maker. Admire your wise Creator. The goodness and beauty of creatures will help you to contemplate Him." And he goes on to say, "There's nothing disgraceful in the composition of the human body, provided that it's not polluted by adultery and sin." Look within yourself. He abides there. And so how do we grow in the Lord? How do we better turn our attention to this truth? Let's go back to St. Gregory of Nyssa. He says the best way to find this is to seek self-knowledge, is to know yourself the way God desires you to know you. This is what he says. And this is what we talked earlier about delusion, where you're going to hear St. Gregory say something really interesting. He says to us, we should know ourselves, that our greatest protection is self-knowledge, and the avoidance of the delusion that we are seeing ourselves when we are really looking at something else. This is what happens to those who do not examine themselves. What they see is strength, beauty, political power, great wealth, pomp, self-importance, bodily stature, and they think that's what they really are. Do you hear how he's making fun of them? Such persons make very poor guardians of themselves. Because of their absorption in something else, they overlook what is their own and leave it unguarded. How can a person protect what he does not know? The most secure protection for our treasure is to know ourselves. Each one of us must know himself as he or she is, so that he may not unconsciously be protecting something else other than himself. And so, remember, God does not make junk. No one here, none of us are here accidentally. I used to think that. Sometimes I think, God must have been flipping a coin. Maybe. Okay, I'll do this. And it really, only until rather recently, when the truth that even before the establishment of creation, He had all of us in mind. Each one of us is completely and personally made by the loving God Himself. That's a mind-blowing thought. I cannot wrap my mind around that. But to contemplate that, to rest in that truth, is liberating for all of us. And so God does not make junk. It is all personal. Each one of us is here, personally designed by the Creator Himself, who's still not done with us. Hello? He's not done with any of us yet. And so, we need to watch our thoughts. We need to watch the thoughts we're swimming in. We need to watch the thoughts that are being imported to us or exported to us. Right? These are the things that you were all talking about earlier, praise God, why I had tears in my eyes. Watch our thoughts, our own and those that are being, the propaganda that's being sent our way. Don't buy the lies of that propaganda. It is a bad gospel. The Greek word for bad gospel, you don't hear it too often, is kakovagelium. Doesn't sound. It's a kakovagelium. Don't buy the lies of the Kakobagelion. But the Evangelion says, the good news, the gospel says, make love your aim. And so all of us, each one of us, never is outside the love of the Lord. He loves us each personally and individually, completely. Another saint, Nicholas Kabasilas, says this: Christ gives to human persons life and growth, nourishment and light and breath. He opens their eyes and gives them light and the power to see. He gives to human persons the bread of life, and this bread is nothing else than himself. He is life for those who are living and a sweet scent for those who breathe. He clothes those who desire to be clothed. He strengthens the traveler, and he is the way. He is at once both the inn along the road and the destination of the journey. When we struggle, he struggles at our side. When we argue, he is the reconciler. And when we win the victory, he is the prize. Thank you. So my sweet sisters, whom I love, and I'm still holding tears in my eyes, I think we only have 2 or 3 more minutes. But if there are any thoughts or sharing or connections any of you want to make for right now, that would be a gift for all of us. Yes?
Sometimes it feels like humiliation is needed